Tom Campbell here. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our Patreon account or through a one-time donation. The links are in the description below. Thank you and enjoy the video.
Good afternoon, Tom. Thank you for being here again for Tom Campbell Answers Your Questions. Our first question is from Michael. This question is about the perception of time in meditation. When I set my timer for 1 hour, it always feels like 5 or 10 minutes. This has become more pronounced over the years. My theory is as I meditate, I move further out into our system where time is clocked differently. What are your thoughts on this?
It's the perception of time that seems to be the variable. The time regulation just ticks on as usual. Our virtual reality has its own clock, and that clock speed always works the same. Consciousness runs on a little different clock. Consciousness processes information very quickly. It processes many times faster, say, than the clock that runs our virtual reality. So you set your virtual reality clock for one time, you get into consciousness, and your perception of time is going to change. And it changes for several reasons. One reason is that we measure time by events, how things, what's passing. Like you get in a room that there's nothing in the room that changes. It's just you in a room, no clocks, nobody coming and going, nothing happening, blank walls, you sitting in the room. Eventually, it becomes impossible for you to guess how much time has elapsed, how long you've been in the room, because you don't have any thing to judge it by. If you're outside sitting on a park bench, well, you know that people walk by every so often, and you can just kind of tell that I've been there so long, so much traffic, so many people, and just you can get a good sense of the time because there are events happening. Change is taking place. Time is really change. Change creates time, or time is necessary for change. So whether whichever way you say that, you can't have change without time. So we kind of measure time with change. Now, of course, that's how we measure, time in a clock with change. How many tick-tocks, how many cycles of a cesium atom, for those clocks, or how many swings of a pendulum for the old grandfather clock. So we measure things with change. When you are in the non-physical doing things, there's two processes there. One, if you are in a situation where lots of things have happened, you're in that non-physical and you've been places, you've done things, you've talked to people, and you may think that a whole lot's gone on because there's been a lot of change, and you may come back and find out only 10 minutes has gone by. And it's like, how could that be? People have that problem in dreams a lot. They'll have a dream, and a dream had all this stuff going on, and then they find out they were only dreaming for 5 or 10 minutes. How's that possible? Well, it's because their sense of time, the way they judge time, is by how much stuff happens. And if a lot of stuff happens because consciousness processes very quickly, then you can think that a whole lot goes on for just a little bit of time. Okay, so that's one thing, but you can warp it the other way. Also, you can be seeing something very interesting, and if you get absorbed in that thing, then time seems to slow down because you stop noticing the stuff going on around you and the happenings around you. So you get into reading a really good book or watching a really good movie, and oh, it's over already? That movie seemed to only be a half an hour long, and it really was, 2 hours long because it had you riveted. And well, not so much a movie, I guess, is a bad example, because a movie has a lot of stuff going on. So that gives you that perception of time. But if you're having an in-depth conversation, let's say with somebody, and it's just you and somebody else sitting there on a bench in this same room, no windows, nothing going on, nothing changing, just the two of you, and you're in a really deep concentration, conversation. Well, you could do that for 2 or 3 hours and think that only a half an hour had gone by. So you see, time can be stretched or compressed depending on your background, what's changing, how focused you are. Because tight focus means you're not aware of changes, even if you just have the conversation. So that's what the issue is. So when you're in meditation, you can be experiencing something just amazing. Like you can be experiencing the larger conscious system itself. You become one with the white light. And that experience may only last for, the virtual reality clock time of, a minute. But it seems like an experience that was, days long. It seems like it's such a, a big piece of your time because it was so magnificent and had such a big focus on it. So things can warp either way. It just kind of depends what you're doing and what your perception of time is. It's not really that you're spending more time in fast space, other than the fact that, yes, you do process in consciousness more quickly. So, when you get a download from one of the databases, your remote viewing, or you're communicating telepathically, you can get a whole paragraph just in a split second. It's like, I don't know the answer. There's the answer. And the remote views are like that too. What's the object? There it is, instantly. Not nearly as long as it would take you to actually look at a picture and judge the picture. That would take a second or a half a second. This happens instantly, faster than you could look at a picture. So those are the two things that are at play here: the fast processing and the depending on what you're doing, the whether you have or don't have an environment with change in it, particularly regular change.
All right, Sam, thank you. Our next question is from Leor. What is the role of homosexuality in the big picture from the point of view of the LCS, since it seems to be contradicting the evolutionary rule set, which is based on attraction to the opposite sex, which guarantees procreation? Is there another reason for it being a significant part of this PMR? Does it play an important role in the growing up process of certain IULCs?
Well, yes and yes to that question. The reason we have homosexuality is because it's a possibility. And it's a possibility because of our rule set. It's a possibility because of biology. Sexuality, varies from one end to the other. Sexuality is something that has a lot of uncertainty in it. Our biology itself has a lot of uncertainty in it. That's why no two people look the same. Even identical twins will have little differences if you know them very well. So there's all this variation that's possible. So how is it that you have a body and attitudes and a sexual identity that you have? Well, there's lots and lots of variables. Some of these variables are rule set variables, biology. Some of them are environmental variables. What was your family like? What was your environment like? So between the two sets of these variables, you end up a particular way. Now, if almost anything's possible, if we have almost everything in the sexual spectrum is possible. I don't know that there's anything that you can think of that doesn't happen. everything happens. There are even people who are born that have mixed genitalia, people that are born with both a vagina and a penis, people who are born with a penis and breasts, and just, there's endless variations. Now, these are in the margins. It's not very many, but these are in the margins. But it just depends on the probability of these things happening, both in the environment and in the biology. So when the system goes through all of these processes that have randomness in them, and it takes that random draw from the probability distribution of the possibilities, well, you're going to get all of those possibilities out. So here's a possibility that's 1 in 1,000. Well, then about 1 in 1,000 people have that. Or here's one that's 1 in 100,000. Well, about 1 in 100,000 people will have that. And here's one that's, 10 to 1. Well, then for every one of these, you get 10 of those. You see, so it just depends on how the probabilities work out between the biology and the environment. Much of it is in the biology, though. The environment then tends to bring things out that have the high potentials or low potentials. The environment tends to bring things out of us. So homosexuality, I don't know what % of the population are homosexual, but there's some average percentage, I guess, and that would be, just according to the probabilities. That's the way it comes out. Now, its value is that all of this variation provides us with learning opportunities, all this variation. Things that are different help us grow up. Things that are unique help us grow up. Diversity is extremely important to our growth. If we were all the same, if we all look the same, act the same, believe the same things, and so on, look how hard it would be to learn anything. Everything would just be the sameness. That's like being in the room with nothing in it, nothing going on. It would be such a dull and boring place. Everything would be the same. So that does not challenge us. Sameness is non-challenging. Diversity is challenging. How do we deal with things that are different than us? How do we deal with all the creatures that are on this planet? How do we deal with them? How do we deal with all the diversity on the planet? How do we deal with each other's? How do we deal with people of different races and different types and different heights, and some are strong and some are weak and some are smart and some aren't? And I mean, we just have all sorts of variety. And much of our opportunity to grow up has to do with the choices that we make and how to deal with others, other people. And in as much as those other people are different from us, gives us a challenge, gives us something to grow up to, something to be able to accept, something, something's different, but we have to not only accept, but be kind and caring and realize, all the animals, all the people on the planet all have value. And it gives us opportunities to outgrow, ignorance of, racism or sexism or any other kind of ism like that separates people from other people. We need to care about others, and doing that with all sorts of people is very growing. There's some people who are just very annoying. There are people who are very aggressive. There are people who are very arrogant. And all of these people challenge us to grow up. They all challenge us to learn how to deal with those people positively. So even the people that we say are bad people or annoying people, they challenge us to grow up. So in this world of diversity in physiology, in sexuality, in skills and looks and behaviors of all sorts, in biology, in environments, there's this variation everywhere. And in this stew of diversity, we have our optimal chance of challenges that, help us grow up, challenges that are right at the right spot for us to grow, because we're supposed to grow up to be kind, to be caring, to make it about other. And if the world was just populated by people, that just, well, if everybody in the world looked exactly like me, that would be a problem. Or maybe even if all the men in the world looked exactly like me and all the women in the world looked exactly like you, Donna, and that was it. Everybody was just exactly the same. See how we lose choice that way? You wouldn't have choice. So that would be a whole range of choices that would just disappear. You'd only find a male or a female that had exactly the same look. There'd be no choice. So sameness takes away choice. Diversity produces choice. So that's why it's valuable. All the diversity we have, all the diversity in all things, not only in sexuality, but in everything else. It's all valuable to us to help us care about other people, not so much of what they look like or, what language they speak or where country they come from, or male or female or black or white or yellow or red or whatever, but to care about people and to let go of all this, to see what's important from what's not, what's meaningful from what's not, making these choices and distinctions between things. So yes, people being homosexual or bisexual or whatever it is, they're all just part of this uncertainty, this randomness that is here for us to interact with. So it's all part of the way things are supposed to be. It's, it can't be any other way. It's not, the way our biology is set up, there's just a lot of ways things can go together. And there's probabilities that they'll go together this way or that way. And our environment's the same way, all kinds of environments out there. And exactly what you incarnate into and what it turns out to be and how you're treated in school and how your family life is and all the rest of that stuff just offers us opportunities. So that we have homosexuality is a good thing in the sense that it helps us with more diversity. And that's the same though of everything. All the things are good. To look at something and say, oh, that's not good, that's a bad thing. We got to get rid of that. Well, no, we have to learn how to live with that positively.
That everyone has value.
That's right.
And that everyone should be accepted.
Sure.
That is your bigger picture viewpoint that people tend to want to shy away from accepting people just as they are. That's
right. And this stew of diversity that we're in occurs because this is a probability and statistical reality. Everything happens because it's more probable than what doesn't happen, or it happens to just be taken on that random draw. So just the nature of this place is to produce diversity. The whole underpinning of how the virtual reality is created produces diversity.
Well, you've experienced a lot of other realities, other physical realities like ours, and you've mentioned that you've noted that there's similarities and there are great differences, and is the whole of reality a sort of diversity experiment?
Yes, it is. All of them are very diverse. Now, the kinds of critters, what else do we call them? The kind of entities that evolve in a particular place could be very different. They may not all look like humanoids. They may not all, be the way things evolved here on this planet. So the animals and the plants and so on are going to evolve different places. They're going to be different. So the shapes will be very different. But basically, it's all there for the same reason. In those other virtual realities, people are making choices, and by those choices, they're evolving or de-evolving the quality of their consciousness. They're all, parts of the larger conscious system. So that much is very similar.
Do they have, in these other realities, do they have as much struggle with acceptance and diversity as we do here?
Yes, they do. They struggle just as much as we do here for the most part. Some places more, some places less, but in general, yes. And the reason for that is that when you first join, when you're a consciousness, you're a piece of consciousness and you've never been in a virtual reality, when you first get into a virtual reality, there's a lot of difficult choices. Depends a little on how your virtual reality is. But in the beginning of these virtual realities, when they start, things are usually very difficult because you have evolved as an avatar to be in a certain environment, like the humanoids. Okay, so now you have humanoids, Neanderthals, Homo sapiens, and the other half dozen humanoids that walked around, say 200, 300,000 years ago. So you have all those, and they evolved out of, on this planet, out of the, biology, evolved them forward. So now you get to that. So it always starts at the beginning. It always starts because all of these virtual realities evolve. They're not programmed, they evolve. And when they evolve, they start with the simple and the crude, and eventually over time, they become more complex and more sophisticated, more refined. But you start at the beginning, and that beginning is usually pretty demanding, pretty rough. So the choices you have there are rather drastic. It's just staying alive is a full-time job. Well, that's not the case here now, 21st century. Staying alive is not a full-time job for most people. Staying alive, we don't even think about it. We get up every morning, go to the office, work, come home, and we don't worry about staying alive. Now, there are people that don't have enough food to eat, don't have medical services, and for them, staying alive is a lot more difficult. But in general, it's a whole lot easier now for the average human being than it was 150,000 years ago for the average human being. So our avatars have to begin from as they evolve. So you start where it's simple, but in those simple places, the choices are usually very strong. Have consequences, have lots of consequences, life and death consequences every day, all day long. At that point, the average humanoid probably doesn't live very long. It doesn't have a very long lifespan. I read someplace that they thought that our, ancient humanoids, didn't live more than about 30 years, 35 years. That was it, because the environment was just too harsh to support them going much longer than that.
Tom, was this true for other realities as well? Did they have rough beginnings? When those virtual realities were created, how did those entities evolve?
Yeah, I think it was similar because all of the virtual realities are evolved realities. So when the reality evolves an entity of some sort, an avatar that's able to make choices that are interesting to consciousness, that's when the consciousness starts to log on and play those characters. Well, that's as soon as these characters get to the point that they can make choices. That's not after they have advanced and refined their choices and become civilized, with their choices and their sharing and built cities. And, it's not like that in the beginning. The human is just another animal walking around on the planet. One that's maybe has a little more mental capacity than others, but And, it's the same with the other planets. Whatever the creatures are, they start at a fundamental basic level. And that's true everywhere. So it depends, some things would be different, but that idea that you have to start at the beginning, people don't just suddenly poof, end up, in some environment someplace, with daycare available and, meals on wheels and, that kind of thing. You don't just do that. All that stuff has to develop out of people caring for each other. All those things all that infrastructure has to develop, that supportive stuff that makes us not have to worry about staying alive every day.
It's interesting too that you say they struggle with diversity as we do. We often have the phrase, "Oh, that's human nature," to be afraid of things that are different. But apparently, it's the nature of consciousness.
It's the nature of consciousness playing avatars in a virtual reality. Avatars grow up and, like I say, start their life under very harsh conditions. And in those very harsh conditions, they learn that things that are different are scary. Things that are different may hurt you. So things that we know are safe are things we're familiar with. So if we're not familiar with it, then we should be wary of it because we don't know what it might do. So things we're not familiar with are what I'm calling things that are different. You see, so this idea that anything different is frightening. That is part of our survival instincts. Yes, and it goes back to when the avatar was still pretty new, pretty fresh. Life was hard. And I think that's true in all the realities. It starts with a difficult reality because it has to evolve. Evolution doesn't start at the end. It's got to work its way from the beginning to that end point, so that no matter what the creature looks like, whether they have 6 heads and 20 legs or they look like humanoids, it doesn't really matter. They have to evolve in their niche. When they get to the point that they're making meaningful choices, then an IUOC can log on and play that character. And when you play that character is in drastic situations. That character is in very hard places. For it to survive, well, it may just need to, take over a cave that other people are already in there. So it just kills everybody else that's in the cave and takes it over from themselves. And maybe that's survival. Well, that's harsh and that's de-evolutionary. It's not kindness or cooperation at all, but it's where we start. So when we start at that sort of place, then we've got a long way to go. We have to outgrow that. We have to become more caring about each other. So we evolve spiritually, as we evolve as humans. I guess we evolve our humanity. Humans start to come together and have tribes. And inside that tribe, people help each other. They start being kind to each other because the tribe is supporting each other. But now they fight with other tribes. And then the tribes coalesce and maybe make bigger tribes. And then you have more people being kind to each other. And then they make cities. And then the cities grow. And then you have countries and the countries grow. So as we evolve, our structures evolve as well. Our social structures evolve. And the whole point is that we need to continue this evolution until we all care about each other.
Well,
There's not separateness.
Sure. Now you're speaking of avatars in virtual realities,
Mm-hmm.
how they have to evolve, how everyone started off as a basic level. But what about at you've often talked about different consciousness levels, not avatars, but the IUOCs or the free will awareness units, the consciousness of a being. Is there, in a non-physical sense, is there a struggle with ego and diversity and acceptance in consciousness space?
Well, there is, in the sense that, let's say you're a consciousness and you log on and you're playing this caveman. Like I say, in this caveman, maybe he has 10 or 20 people in his group, his children, his people. And let's say it's a him, and he's got his tribe, and they all support each other, and they're all starving. And they come across a place that has food that other people have, and they have shelter that other people have. And these other people are only 4 or 5 people, and they're 10 people. So what do? They get to make a choice. So they could make a choice and say, well, let's ask these people if they'll share with us. And the people that they ask may say no. Well, then they're going to say, well, okay, they don't want to share. Let's trudge on. Probably not. You see, now you're a consciousness. You've just been in a chat room chatting with other people. That's all you've done. You haven't had a lot of experience. You haven't had experience making tough choices, making decisions, even caring for people. You've just been in a big chat room. So you have all this potential to grow up or grow down, but you've never actually actualized any of it. You've never had cause to. You've never had any situation that really caused you to make a moral choice other than, well, I'm in the chat room. Should I lie or should I tell the truth? But that's about the only choice you have, and none of it has any consequences. So see, you have no experience. So you haven't developed very much. You haven't grown up much. You haven't grown down much. You're just kind of lollygagging there in the middle because there's just not that much going on in your chat room. So now suddenly here you are, you're this cave guy, and you have a starving tribe. You guys are starving. Maybe you only have another day or two before you all drop dead. You need shelter. It's cold outside. So what are you going to do? The other people don't want to share with you. So do you just take it over and you say, all right, we can just take this stuff and push them out of the cave and get rid of them all, take their stuff, and we'll survive and they won't. How do you make that choice? Well, if you had been in a situation that had those kinds of choices, maybe you would have grown up to the point that you would say, no, taking their stuff and killing them isn't right. We won't do that. But if you've never been in a situation where you can develop that understanding, then your moral sense is kind of neutral. You've never done anything either way. So what you do is you're very self-centered. It's all about you. And you say, all right, let's just take it. And you do. And now you and your people survive. And those other people are back out in the cold. And you feel good about that because you saved your progeny. They're going to go on and maybe make more humans. So the thing is that we don't come into the game initially all grown up and then make terrible choices. We come into the game initially without ever having made a serious choice before in our life. So we haven't had a chance to evolve the quality of our consciousness very much or de-evolve it. So it's kind of, like I say, kind of neutral. It's not a high quality. It's not a particularly low quality. It just is lacking experience. And when you're stuck then in a tough situation of life or death, you tend to make the choice that's self-centered, that serves you, and you discount other people. So that's what we did. And that's what most all creatures in virtual realities are going to do. Now, after you've been in a virtual reality where you've had these kinds of choices and you realize that just killing other people and taking their stuff is non-sustainable. That doesn't work in the long term. It's not right. And now there's plenty of people, and now your survival isn't that tough. And you start to grow up and you start to get moral attitudes about what's right and what's wrong. So that's part of our evolution. That's why we're here, to evolve. But our first set of choices tend to be very self-centered because we've never grown up enough not to be self-centered. We've just been in a chat room, and chat rooms are kind of self-centered spaces. You just chat and you say things and other people say things, and there's no consequences. It's just, it's kind of a self-centered existence. So there's no there's not much growth there, which is why the virtual realities had to be created. The chat room is just not a really good learning place for consciousness. You don't learn much. So the virtual realities had to be created in order to make choices with important consequences. Now you get some growth. Now you get to see that being ugly and being mean in the long term is a disadvantage. It's unsustainable. It doesn't work. I mean, we're still trying to learn that lesson, right? We still have people that think they can run the world and take charge and order everybody else around and overrun other people's free will for their own benefit. But the more and more we do that, the more obvious it becomes that that isn't sustainable. It doesn't work. It burns itself out. It's self-defeating. Fascism and totalitarianism is fundamentally unstable. It isn't sustainable. It self-destructs. And eventually we'll learn that. We're in the process of trying to figure that out right now, right? You probably have about half the world that thinks fascism is a great idea if you're in charge. And the other half of the world thinks it's a bad idea, no matter who's in charge. So that's fine. But, 150,000 years ago, probably almost everybody thought fascism was a good idea if you were in charge. So we're changing, we're growing up. We're not trying to overrun everybody that's different than us and control people. And, I'm the boss and you're the slave. You do what I say. That was common early on, but not so common anymore. It still exists, but not so common anymore. That's good.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, it is better. We're coming along slowly. Well, we did diverse from the subject just a little bit, but I think it was very interesting how it evolved, that we come back to people that are different, need acceptance. We need to learn how to get along with each other, and that's how we eventually grow up in this reality.
It's part of that. All of that boils down to becoming less self-centered, making more of your choices about other. You see, a measure of maturity, a measure of growth, a measure of consciousness quality is how self-centered are you? If we had a little meter, that was a self-centered meter, it could take a reading, we stick it on our forehead and it would say, okay, what did I get? Self-centered, I got a score of 200, is that good or bad? Well, if we had that, we'd all know exactly where we stood in the consciousness quality, evolutionary position where we are, because how self-centered we are is really how grown up we are. If mostly it's about us, about me, I want my way, I need things the way I want them. I'm upset, I'm angry, I need the world to change to be the right way, which is the way I want it to be. And as long as it's about us, then we have a long way to grow. Children are naturally very self-centered because they're small and they don't have big pictures. They just have little pictures. And little picture is a very self-centered picture. It's just about you. At first it's just them and mom and dad, that's all it's in the little picture, and then the picture gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and you have to take into account more and more people and more relationships and more connections, and developing in a way that you care more and more about other, and you're not so self-centered. Now, when I say self-centered, that doesn't mean that you can't take care of yourself, that you shouldn't brush your teeth and take a shower and, go to school and become educated. It doesn't mean that you don't care about yourself. That's not what I mean by self-centered. When you make choices only for your own good, only for your benefit, and anybody else is irrelevant, that's the self-centered I'm talking about. That you make choices that affect no one. You're brushing your teeth, taking a shower, and getting educated. They benefit everybody, not just you. Those things have a lot of benefit to others as well as to yourself. So those are good things to do, that you make your bed in the morning, that you, tie your shoes, even though you're just going to have to take them off, later that day, that you take the time to do those kinds of things. it's not only important for you, but it's important for everybody else too. You know, that you are neat and take care of yourself and don't throw litter on the ground and et cetera, et cetera. You know, all these little details in our life are all choices, and they have to do with being self-centered or not. If you take your garbage and heave it out your car window, that's because you're self-centered and you don't care whether that garbage bothers anybody else or not.
It's high entropy, as you say.
Yeah, that's high entropy.
When you keep things neat and clean and you look after yourself, it's low entropy and organized.
Yeah, that's low entropy.
It does make a
Exactly.
difference. This is very interesting, Tom. Thank you. I'm going to go on to the next question. Also from Leor. To paraphrase the old saying about the branch in the woods, if I'm sleeping alone in a room and there's nobody to observe me, what happens to my body and to the room when I sleep? Do they become swirling particles that only coalesce back again when I open my eyes and regain my sensory intake?
Well, no. Well, yes and no. There never was a room. There never was a body. None of that ever existed. So how can it disappear and then have to come back? It never was in the first place. This is a virtual reality. That body is just in the mind. It's how the consciousness interprets the data it gets from the data stream. The server, the data stream, the server, the computer that serves up the virtual reality. The rendering engine, that's another way to call it, the rendering engine of the virtual reality. That computer sends a data stream. The consciousness gets that data and interprets it as a body lying in a bed. There is no body lying in a bed. It's consciousness making that interpretation. When that body lying in a bed is no longer in the data stream, then that consciousness no longer sees a body laying in a bed. So if you are in a room by yourself, right? Like now, I'm in a little studio all by myself, and Donna, I think Keith just left and went out. I don't know if he's come back yet, but you may be sitting in a house all by yourself, and that means that nobody except me sees you now. Now I'm just getting a data stream that I interpret as you. I see a woman sitting there, and your blonde hair, and the blue dress and the white sweater. I see all that, and that's how I interpret the data I get. But I'm just getting data. I'm getting data over Zoom. I look at that data. That data is, 1 million pixels. Every pixel has a color, an intensity, and a location. Has 3 values. So that's the data I get. I look at all these pixels and I say, oh, there's Donna. Hello, Donna. Now, nobody has actually seen Donna's physical body. You see, so where did Donna go? Well, Donna never was there. Donna's just data that somebody interprets. So Keith comes home and he walks through the door and he says, hi, Donna. And he looks at you. And when his avatar looks at you, his consciousness gets a data stream that has you in it. When he goes and then looks in the refrigerator, his consciousness doesn't have a data stream with you in it. Because why would you be in the refrigerator? You see? So that's how it works. So whatever he walks back outside and looks across the street, his data stream doesn't even have his own house in it. It has other people's houses. He turns back around and looks at your house, and now his data stream has his house in it, or maybe his neighbor's house in it. He walks inside and the stuff that's in his house is in his data stream. He walks outside and the stuff in his house is not in his data stream. So you see, that's how it works. So when you lie down in a room all by yourself, there is no room. There is no bed. There is no body. None of that exists. All of that is information in virtual reality. And the virtual reality only exists in the minds of the players. So I'm a consciousness. You see, I'm a player. I'm a consciousness. And my avatar is sitting here in this chair, looking at a Zoom screen. There is no chair. There is no computer. There is no Zoom screen. All of that's virtual. It's my data stream. I get a data stream that shows me a computer in front of me. And that computer is a virtual computer. And it works because of the logic that it's designed with, and the rule set produces certain outcomes given that logic. And that's what I see. So anyhow, that's the way the world works. So the answer to it is no. It's not when you go in a room by yourself and close your eyes, everybody disappears. And now when you open your eyes, they suddenly reappear again. It doesn't work like that. They were never there in the first place. When you close your eyes, the data stream describing what's in your environment goes away. You don't have that. Now you have a data stream that maybe shows you light behind your eyelids, or maybe shows you what you're dreaming, but it's not showing you anything in your physical world. So you're not aware of your physical world until you open your eyes, and then there's your physical world again, is in your data stream. See, it works the same way when you're playing a Sims character. A Sims character doesn't know what's in the refrigerator unless he walks across the room and opens the door. And when he opens the door, what does he see? Well, it's a data stream. You get a data stream to your computer that tells you what's inside that refrigerator. When your Sims character opens the door, you see, oh, there's beer in there and a watermelon and, you know, a carton of milk. And you see that in the refrigerator, and you can tell your Sims character, reach in and grab the carton of milk. And he'll do that. But where's the milk? Where was that milk before he opened the door? Did it just appear when he suddenly opened the door? Of course not. There is no door. There is no refrigerator. All of it is just a data stream coming to your computer. See, it works the same way. The virtual reality exists only in the minds of the players. That's why we called it a virtual reality, only in the minds of the players. So if in the game of Sims, there are no players, not a single player is logged on to Sims. Is Sims computing all those refrigerators and all the houses and all the people on that map? No, it's not computing anything. There aren't any players. It doesn't compute a thing. So then one single player logs on. Now, that computer sends out one data stream to that player and tells him what it is he sees. And if he moves around, it tells him now what he sees. And it stops showing him what he saw before. You see, so it's just data streams to players. There are no avatars. Avatars are just eye candy. It's how we interpret the data. They don't really exist. We're an interpretation of consciousness that gets a data stream. This is a reality based on information, not on mass. So
and yet, the avatar is subject to the second law of thermodynamics, as I'm eventually finding out.
That's part of the rule set. Yeah, part of the rule set is that everything dissipates. Everything, they would say that if we wait long enough, there won't be anything left in the entire universe except hydrogen gas and elementary particles, because that's like the minimum set. That's the bare bones. That doesn't fall apart into anything else. That's kind of stable. Maybe even that hydrogen would eventually decay into just elementary particles. But that's what it'll finally go to. But that's many billions of years from now. So it's stable enough that we can go here and play this game. So it's a good VR that'll stay stable for a long time. But everything dissipates. That's the second law of thermodynamics. If you don't put any energy in, then the system's entropy will grow. So everything has a vapor pressure. If you take a glass of water and let it sit, the water turns into vapor. The water's not there anymore. There is no longer water. You just have, little molecules of water floating around in the air. Water vapor. You have vapor. But that's high entropy compared to them all being in the water. That was ordered. Now they're just loose in the atmosphere. That's high entropy. Everything evaporates. Every battery eventually runs down. You even take a block of steel, just a box of steel, If you wait long enough, that steel will evaporate just like the water. If you wait long enough, everything has a vapor pressure, which means it's throwing off molecules. It's throwing off molecules all the time. Some molecule will get enough vibrational energy to break its bonds and fly away. So everything dissipates. Now, the way you lower entropy is by putting effort, putting energy in. You have to put energy in, and now that energy can order things. Now you're going toward lower entropy, but it takes energy. That's why we have to put effort into growing up. And as soon as we stop putting effort into growing up, we start to grow down. We start to de-evolve. If we just don't care about anything but ourselves, we de-evolve. If we don't put effort into growing up, we grow down. So there's always change. There's no way to just stay the same. You have to always be working. Actually, you have to always be working just to stay the same. And that's not a stable point. That's not sustainable. So.
Right. Thank you. On to the next question. This is from Christopher. I keep finding arguments that consciousness alone will not collapse the wave function, that it is only due to an interaction which causes particle isolation to be broken. I cannot come to a conclusion either way yet. This is one of the big questions I have, really. The question, if I could feel confident consciousness alone is enough through reading the data long after the experiment, I would rest at ease. Perhaps I shouldn't have used the word particle in that statement. It isn't one yet, if a wave.
It's not a wave either. It's neither a wave nor a particle. And the wave function isn't really a real thing either. That's just some logic, some math. It's not a physical thing. It's just a concept. So it's just an abstraction in logic, in the logic of quantity we call math. None of that really exists. There is no collapse. Consciousness doesn't collapse a wave function. There isn't a wave function, and consciousness doesn't collapse anything. The way it works is we get data in a data stream, as I just said, and that data defines our reality until a consciousness player gets some information in his data stream that defines something in the virtual reality, right? The information defines things in the virtual reality. So when we get information that describes a thing in the virtual reality, then for us, that thing is in the virtual reality. That's what we see. So if I'm playing the World of Warcraft and on my screen I see an elephant, well, there's an elephant in my World of Warcraft virtual reality because I got the data stream that had an elephant in it. Now, if I see an elephant in the virtual reality, then that's a virtual reality, it's a multiplayer game, then anybody else who's there has to see that elephant too. So if they send me that data stream, somebody else looks there, that somebody else has to see the elephant. Otherwise, it's not a very good virtual reality. If everybody who's in the virtual reality sees different things, then you can't have a multiplayer game. Multiplayer game only makes sense if they all share that reality. So if something goes into my data stream, then I get that information that then creates something in the virtual reality. The data creates what's in the virtual reality. My interpretation of the data, okay, creates something in the virtual reality. So now we go back to the double slit experiment. What happens is that a particle is being measured at a slit. And when that measurement is made, the system has to send a result of the measurement. Well, if that measurement measures particles, and if there's a probability that there's a particle there, then that measurement of that particle creates a particle in that virtual reality because there's a particle created in the mind that got that data. The virtual reality exists only in the minds of the players. So that's how it works. That's why there is such a thing as the measurement problem and the observer paradox, because if there is no observer, if there is no consciousness getting data, then nothing happens. There is no virtual reality going on. Again, if all the players in Sims or World of Warcraft are all logged off, what's being generated by the server? Nothing. The server's just sitting there, idle. There is nothing. There is no World of Warcraft or Sims locality with little characters running around doing things. And, oh, we just get to pop in and see where they are now. No, it's not like that. They don't exist. They only exist in our minds. So once that elf, takes a measurement, what does he do? He turns over a rock and sees what's under the rock. Well, there's something under that rock. Now, once he sees it, once it's in his data stream that there's a gold coin under that rock, now that gold coin is in that reality, and anybody in that reality can see that coin under the gold rock. Anybody who looks there will get the same data, you see, because that's how virtual realities work when they're multiplayers. That's how it has to work. So that's what's going on. There is no wave function. It's not a particle. It's not a wave. This is a virtual reality. All right, so we do the experiment, and the reason that the observer is important is because if there is no observer, then no consciousness gets the data, and nothing can come into our virtual reality, because the whole virtual reality exists only in the minds of the players. So if there's no player that has that in his mind, then it's not in the virtual reality. How does something come into the virtual reality? It has to come in the mind of a player. You need a player. You need an observer. That's why that works that way. So see, it's not about wave functions and waves and particles. None of that really exists. This is a virtual reality.
Thanks, Tom. I'm going to leave a link to the playlist of the MBT Science Trilogy for all of you interested in your complete science presentation. We've got one more question from Stephen A. I'm no physicist, but I think I have a basic understanding of black holes. I was under the impression that what goes into a black hole does not come out, so that has led me to be afraid of them. Apparently, data does escape a black hole in the form of Hawking radiation. This radiation appears to be completely random. My first thought was in relation to MBT, and that somehow black holes were acting as a sort of recycle bin for our computed simulation. I do not intentionally go near them in an out-of-body state or a meditative state, so could you share your understanding of them, or maybe a theoretical purpose for them?
Okay, well, black holes are part of this virtual reality. The reason they're part of this virtual reality is because this virtual reality has in its rule set a thing called gravity. Things attract. The bigger the mass, then the greater its gravitational pull on other masses. It's just the nature of the rule set. So if you have a mass and it attracts other masses, and those masses stick together, and it attracts more masses and they stick together, you get a bigger thing. Keeps growing. And the bigger it is, the more it can suck more stuff in. So eventually, in the EE world, that's called positive feedback. In other words, it just keeps going until it saturates. What that means is that it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, more and more gravity, right? More mass to have, the more gravity you have. So the mass gets bigger, the black hole gets bigger, but as it gets bigger, it also gets denser because it's pulling on itself. So it gets more compact. So the black hole doesn't just grow like this, but it also condenses and is pulled together. So yes, it is growing bigger in size, but it's also growing denser and denser. You have more and more mass in a smaller and smaller space. The density keeps going up. So it gets to a point that just now is a big, like a vacuum cleaner. It's a big piece of mass that sucks all other mass toward it. And it's called a black hole because it has such a strong gravitational field that photons can't escape. photons try to get loose and they go running away from the black hole, but they get sucked right back in. Okay, so that's the concept of a black hole. It exists because gravity exists, and gravity is in our rule set. Gravity is necessary for this rule set to produce a stable virtual reality. If you didn't have gravity, then everything would just fly apart. It wouldn't work. All right, gravity has its dark side called a black hole. It creates things that will eventually eat everything else, right? So I guess if we don't all end up as hydrogen gas and elementary particles, we'll all end up in one big black hole eventually. You got these little like vacuum cleaners around sucking everything else up. So yes, when you get a rule set that works on initial conditions, produces a virtual reality, that virtual reality is not going to stay stable forever, because the very thing you need to make it work, like gravity, also in the long run will perhaps destroy it. Okay, now this is just very basic black holeness, right? There's a lot more details in it to this. I'm just kind of giving you just kind of the idea of it. Now, there may be other limitations. You heard of Hawking radiation. So sometimes energy is given off. So it's not just growing, whatever, it's also spewing stuff out. And black holes have other people have other ideas about them. But it was only in the 1970s that black holes were even theoretical things. And it wasn't until probably middle 70s or maybe even into 80s before they actually saw one and identified. So it's a relatively new thing, in science. So there's a lot about black holes we don't really know yet. And much of what we think we know about them is just conjecture, just things we think are probably there. So we come up with theories and we collect a little bit of information and we do experiments, and those experiments may give evidence towards supporting this theory or that theory, but a lot of it isn't real well known. It's not like you can go up and examine a black hole. It's something that is more, it is actual. We see them, and mostly we see them, at the center of a galaxy. It's the thing at the center of the galaxy that just pulls the galaxy together. It's the thing that probably allows it to spin, the galaxy, to rotate. It's the center about which the galaxy moves. And then there's another galaxy and it has one. So they think all the galaxies probably have black holes at their center as a stabilizing thing. But again, all of this is mostly theory with a little bit of evidence to support it, because black holes are hard to see, because the black hole is black because of the absence of light. The only way we see things is by looking at the light. Well, black holes don't have any light. Well, we get a little bit of Hawking radiation around the rim or something. We'll see a little corona there maybe. But again, mostly theory, not a lot of observation, except we'll look in the center of a galaxy and we'll see a dark spot. But that means we see nothing because there's no light. I mean, we need light to see, right? So it's not that we can actually look at the black hole and see what's going on in there. The black hole is something that you cannot see. It's the absence of light is what it is. So it's really hard to know what's going on inside there other than theory and conjecture. So don't get too wrapped up in black holes. It's mostly theory and conjecture. And it has some fair amount of fact base to it these days, but don't let it scare you. If you're afraid of black holes, should point out you should also be terrified of the second law of thermodynamics that says the whole universe will turn to dust, in elementary particles, hydrogen atoms.
Well, are his fears justified in a non-physical state, something that is part of our...
No, it doesn't have anything to do with the non-physical state. It's just
in an out-of-body state, he should not be worried about a black hole.
He should not be worried about black holes. The black holes are because of gravity. That's it. That's a rule set. thing.
That's our physical
For
rule
this
set.
virtual reality
Yeah.
has to do with this virtual reality. So it's a virtual black hole and a virtual reality. And when you're out of body, it means nothing. It only means something to be in this, that's inside this virtual reality. It doesn't have any non-physical counterpart or anything like that. It just is a kind of an attribute of the rule set. And you can't make a rule set, it seems, that is stable without also creating things that eventually will destroy it. That seems to be a hard thing to do. For things to be stable forever and to have variation and evolution and change, then that's difficult. The only way you can have things that stay the same forever is if you don't have change and you don't have evolution and nothing moves. A deterministic thing, perhaps, but that's not a useful thing. If nothing changes, then what good is it? It doesn't do anything. Has no moving parts. It's a nothing. So anything that allows evolution allows change. And if you're going to allow change, then eventually that change is going to the things that create that change and create that universe like ours are going to unwind. It's just the nature of a universe like ours, a three-dimensional universe of stuff, virtual stuff. It just works out that way.
Well, thank you very much, Tom. Those were all very interesting answers. And thank you for submitting those questions.
I was feeling a little bit philosophic tonight, so we kind of ran off on some philosophy, MBT philosophy there.
Good stuff. All right.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Oh, you're welcome, Donna. It's always fun.
All right.
Tom Campbell here. I and MBT Events hope you liked this video. We now have well over 1,000 hours of free video on this user-friendly, ad-free YouTube channel. Though these videos are free to our viewers, they represent many thousands of hours in production and editing, and many thousands of dollars invested in video and audio equipment, along with the required computers and software to store and process the raw video into finished products. So far, all of this content has been funded directly out of our own pockets. Be assured, we will always continue to do what we can. It's our life, our purpose, a labor of love that we will continue to pursue as best we can. However, those pockets are not as deep as they used to be. Thus, we are now seeking to augment our resources with support from our viewers. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our newly created Patreon account or through a one-time donation. The links are in the description below. Thank you.